another episode of the Laid Back Life podcast, where we're talking about how to love life, entrepreneurship, and improve daily. Joining me today, Seth Price. I assume everybody knows you, but if they don't, Seth's the founding partner and business backbone of Price Benowitz, as well as the founder and CEO of BluShark Digital. Seth took a two-person law firm, scaled it to over 45 lawyers, and now takes that same digital power that built the firm to create the best-in-class digital agency focused on the legal sector in BluShark Digital. And honestly, those are kind of why he's here, but not even really why he's here. Because in addition to those things, he's a frequent lecturer, moderator of some of the largest and most influential law firm conferences in the United States, speaking on tools and strategies to align business development with changing habits and AI, and building websites and SEO. But the part that I love, in addition to all that, is the fact that he doesn't do those things and then turns around and tries to schedule time to have fun. He does all those things together. So I got to see Seth earlier in April at ABA Tech Show. He had left the happy hour early to go do an architectural tour. He's brought his kids to other conferences, and if he's flying from DC to a conference in Chicago, he might pop over to New York to go see a Broadway show with it. So you've done such a great job turning this lecture circuit into a really fun life, and that's what I want to chat with you today about.
That's awesome. And the fact that I'm on a podcast that is professing to be laid back, and the fact that I'm on it, my kids would be laughing. But no, I get and appreciate what you have pointed out, because it is something I've strived for. In fact, as I've tried to up my LinkedIn game, I had a post a few weeks ago about when I was a baby lawyer. I started a big law in DC, and I was not very good. But the partner I worked for, he cared about quality of life, so he didn't want to travel, and he had young kids. So I was sent on the road, and I had this rule I made, which is every place that I went for business travel, I had to do one fun thing. This is when I was just a grunt. And I was in Iowa, and I defended my first deposition. And when opposing counsel, we were at each other for an hour and a half, 2 hours. And when we were done, we had the rest of the afternoon off. I'm like, hey, you want to jump in the car and go to Field of Dreams? That was 45 minutes down the road in Dyersville, Iowa. So we went there and shagged fly balls, and got to play in a little pickup game, and a busload of German tourists came and watched it. It was awesome. So my point is, I've always subscribed to that. Easier said than done, depending on your job and the constraints. But even if it's just a nice meal, the Negro Baseball Hall of Fame when I was in Kansas City, a special restaurant, whatever it is, something that isn't like I'm on a plane going there and getting back. And again, once you have kids, you want to get home because you don't really want to, you want every minute you can with the kids. So that there are exceptions, and the world changes and your life changes. But I've tried to live by that the best I can.
I did not realize that was a day one Seth travel thing.
Well, yeah. And look, the world that we live in, that you and I are blessed to be in, where we can go to cool places, hang out with interesting people, and, one day it's in Vegas, one day it's in Miami, one day it's in Chicago. I mean, we're in the coolest cities in the world at an amazing time in history, with the ability to do these things, very often covered or at least a write-off. It allows us to live life in a way where, people often say you seem to travel a lot, you go to a lot of conferences. I'm like, it doesn't feel that much. In the fall and spring, I go to 3 a month for 2.5 months. It's not crazy. It's just, but when I do it, I get to hang out with you. I was in Vegas for a conference, which was a big one of the year, MTMP, where I moderate a day. And then on the way back, ABA Tech Show was there. So of course I go to see what's going on and what's there. I end up at a happy hour with you. And Mario Godoy, our good friend, has a second event that weekend that I wasn't going to, but we went to the dinner boat tour, on the Chicago River, and got to enjoy. I mean, to me, compared to digging ditches, that's pretty freaking cool.
Oh, totally. But so I'm curious. Okay, so last week we had Brett Tremblay on. So Brett, we talked about to if you'll allow me my great dad joke, right? The assistance of a great life. So what assistance do you need, and what assistance do you need with both spellings to live a great life? So what sort of support do you have in place to help you coordinate this travel?
Well, so look, a couple things. One, despite having 3 kids who used to be very young and are now sort of middle and high school, my wife went from full time with one kid to freelance with two kids to not really, no day job with a third kid. That's helped a lot. I mean, that's not nothing. So that's a luxury that I have. When I want her to come along with me, my in-laws, sometimes my parents are able to step in, hang out with the kids, so win-win. From a logistics point of view, sadly, we're transitioning this person after about 3 or 4 years, but having a travel person. I love travel. I mean, as I know you do. And it can be a blessing and a curse. I can change things. Like the other night, we could talk about it in a moment, but I'm headed to Australia. I was asked to speak at a conference in Australia next week, and I was like, sure, why not? Right. So book the tickets. I actually studied in Australia at University of Sydney for a semester, was a summer associate in Australia, and went back for the first time after many years the summer before last. So to me, I'm like, I get to go back and see my buddies again, really close friends, lifelong friends that I had from way back. And then I just realized, I'm like, it was literally Saturday night. I got early Sunday morning tennis. I realized, you know what? I'm flying in and out of Brisbane. And I know I did a fully refundable ticket back. I should just flip it. I Delta miles, they're cheap. I transfer some Amex miles to Delta, and now we're going to Sydney and catching up with my old friends that wasn't part of the trip before. So part of it is the blessing, the curse. The wheels are always turning, but having somebody to do that, book it, figure out upgrades, the stuff that a middle-aged person cares about, um, I think has allowed me to sort of have that in the background and just be able to focus on the stuff I want to focus on.
I mean, dude, I will tell you, I have an SOP with my executive assistant that says like I want to sit in the aisle as close to the front as possible. These are the airlines I prefer. Like we have just
Yeah.
gone all out just to
Well,
make it
so
easier.
it went when it was, I think we actually, this person sort of, who was amazing, ran their course, I think partially because it went from just me to me and Nalini to all of Blue Shark to all of Blue Shark and Price Benowitz. It's not that much, but it's different than when you can focus. It's like a different job. It's not the way it used to be. It was just me. And now there's all this nonsense. But yeah, there's an order of operations. We live in DC. We got three airports, DCA, BWI, IAD. We have loyalty programs. I went all on American a few years ago, built the business on Southwest, but there's an order of operation. There's if it nonstop, for me, I'm nonstop at all costs, even if
Oh
it's a
yeah.
loyalty issue versus staff. There's a dollar figure where we do it, where we would do a connection. There's a point when you would take a hotel with a conference rate versus using a third party provider like super.com or one of those that can be a lot less, but comes with some more restrictions. And you have to sort of, if you put all that into a spreadsheet, like, look, if it's a system and it works, you have to be okay that 90% of the time it's going to work. There's going to be a time where you end up spending more on something or doing something wrong. You learn lessons along the way. Third party apps are great, but in Vegas, be very careful because the hotels treat it differently. When you travel anywhere else, and let's say your name was on it, but then your staff member decides to go instead of you, that's no big deal. In Vegas, it takes an act of God to change the name on a reservation or even at the hotel. So just know that you pick up on those things. So that was my hack. Was I had a person in the Philippines, we're transitioning to somebody in Latin America whose sole job it is to, and I say sole, I'm combining that. This is a topic for maybe this podcast, maybe not, but combining that with one of my EOS rocks for this quarter is to get a email person beyond just using software to review emails and not let me constantly look at the phone. Because if there's a fault, I think it's less travel and more the ADHD with the phone being too hyper focused on checking because there's always something, right? You got texts, then you got the emails, maybe a LinkedIn message is coming through, maybe somebody's responding to your post. So having somebody be that gateway the way I did for travel, my goal is to do that for email.
Well, and I think there's definitely there's a merge point in that conversation because like I will shut off. I have all my notifications shut off except like calls to people that are already in my
Oh,
list or from my wife and my executive assistant because like God forbid I don't want to catch I bought tickets to go see the White Sox when the Tuesday before ABA Tech Show. $8 first row, except I didn't get the update of the rain delay for 3.5 hours. So I show up to a game that wasn't going to be played for another 3 hours because I had all my notifications shut off. And like, you learn, but it's cool.
And
The
you got to see Comiskey, new Comiskey, like for longer than you thought.
Correct. I got to wander around, all eight of us that showed up to this game on time because they had because it's the White Sox. But anyway, the funniest thing though to me about travel is when it goes horribly wrong, you learn really fast, but you also I think get a great story.
Correct. With exceptions, but yes, it is you definitely learn. But there are two types of go wrong. There's wrong with an experience, and there's wrong at the airport. It's funny because one of the online sort of speakers to business people was saying, if it's a first world issue, your flight's delayed, go to town and enjoy the city. Yes, the issue is there are pieces where you're literally trapped. There's not much going on. Look, you can sit there, read a book, you can watch a movie, you can make phone calls, you can check your email, you can do whatever you want. There's only so much. I try to make that the offsite. I've traveled enough and gamed the system enough or bought enough that you have access to lounges, you can get away. And to me, given that, you've worked from all over the country and traveling for was a summer or beyond,
Yeah, we did over
um,
a year on
over a
the road.
year, on the road, it shouldn't be such a horrible thing that if you're stuck in a lounge or even, on the tarmac, at times when can you psychologically get yourself out of the negative so that it's not there. I have this talking about travel. Every time there's a delay, I look at it this way. As long as it's not going to a wedding or a life event that you can't get back, so when it's delayed, I got nowhere to be. I was supposed to get home at 10 instead I get home at 2 in the morning. Not good, but I'm not missing anything. I'll
Right.
be up, I'll be there when the kids wake up in the morning. And so it's trying to use all the negative travel karma up when it doesn't matter.
Makes total sense. So I know, I mean, you've mentioned the lounges, you've mentioned the
Yeah.
loyalty programs, you mentioned that stuff. Like, give me that advice to somebody who's starting this. Like, what are the things that you wish you knew on day one that you would put together to make all this fun travel easier?
I look, you do what you love. We always talk about that. And, just whether it's going to conferences, I love the game of travel. I have since I was, had 18, 19 years old and first started having any flights in college. I call up Amex now and they welcome me for some absurd number of years as a loyal member. It's like somewhere like 88. I first got an Amex card because if
Hey,
you're
it's a
old,
great year.
they used to have this thing with American Express and Northwest Airlines that when you were a college student, if you signed up, which paid my $55 for many years before I elevated to the gold and platinums. But what I found was it was two round trip tickets anywhere in the country on Northwest Airlines. Northwest, for those of you who don't know, merged into Delta. It was another legacy carrier, but all their flights, their hubs were three. It was Detroit was their main one, Minneapolis, and Memphis. Which Delta took over, sort of closed out the Memphis, but still has Detroit, which is huge, and Minneapolis and Salt Lake ended up fighting it out. But the point was spring break every year. You go to the Bahamas from Philly, you'd have to go through Detroit. You want to go to LA, you went through Detroit. But I started playing the game early on, and I think the game is harder today. But what I would say is just map it out. There's tons of people. Sandy Van loves this stuff, the 10X groups, where you figure out if you have credit and you can get these cards and use their sign up bonuses. It's a gateway drug. They're trying to get you in. They're hoping at some point you don't pay your bills on time and you give them lots of interest. But assuming that you're solvent and you're playing it for the right reasons, making sure the money you spend is spent well. And something that I've done for everybody that works with me, Nalini, and as you know, Will from BluShark, I've always allowed people, if they want, to use their own credit cards and get reimbursed so that they can there's a lot of benefit to spending money on airline credit cards. So figuring out, I would say the advice, which I can't say I didn't take early, was pick an airline, go deep, figure out how to get some love with it, and then figuring out how you spend money. I think the one thing advice I would give is to be very careful because if you make one mistake, all of your gains can be wiped out. somebody at the law firm at Price Benowitz made a mistake and didn't pay interest on like $100,000 bill, right? That was a lot of money just for not paying for like a couple weeks by accident. It was we were solvent. They just didn't, I don't know what they thought, but they didn't pay it on time. They thought, oh, I'll pay this other bill. I'm just like, blew my mind because the only reason this makes sense, that whole game, is if you're not paying. The moment you pay interest, you might as well have a cashback card and forget all the points. Makes no
Gotcha.
sense. The points are collapsing with most programs like Marriott into a penny a point. And so the whole game, if you like the game, is can you do better than a penny a point? And I'll give you two sort of quick hacks. And especially as business owners, we get an advantage that most people don't have. It's harder when you start out, then you just have your own spend. So as a business owner, um, internet spend is extremely powerful on the Amex Business Gold. There's a 4x multiplier for the first $150,000 you spend on Google AdWords or Facebook. Chase Sapphire Reserve has some crazy multipliers for Lyft and for meals and for other areas. So that if you figure out what you spend on, match them up, that is the goal. So right now, my personal sort of angle has been the Amex Business Gold with multiple of those cards every time I hit 150 for different businesses. And the Chase Sapphire Reserve is another one, gives you some cool lounges and a multiplier. But again, it's pay to play. You figuring out what the card costs. Can you use the benefits they give you to offset that? And generally, most have usable benefits, but then there's a delta that's like between $100 and $200 that's very hard to wipe out completely, not always. And then basically looking at those, and I would say when you're younger, and I'm still a pretty frugal person, um, that you can do this, but I think knowing that it's a game and that you probably, if you never did any of that and you just had a really good cashback credit card, would probably live as well. The question is, would you take the trips? That's the
Right.
piece for me, is that if it's quote unquote free, it's almost prepaid, I'll do it. Whereas if the money's in the bank and it's should I save it or should I travel? Savings is pretty powerful and harder to get away from versus if it's points, it's not savings. So it's sort of giving you this world. So I would say as business owners, and something I've talked to Stefan, I don't know if you know him out of Toledo. He's great at that. It's taught me a lot. The thought that you're sort of allowing yourself a way to force save for travel to me is really great because I think we both value it both for ourselves and our families. To me, that's I think the greatest gift you can give your kids is getting them to see the world.
Oh, totally. And I think for me, the next step of that is like it's easier to use points for the business class or the first class or the upgrade or the
100%.
this, instead, whereas the
And it's
cashback,
fun,
yeah,
and the object, like somebody, one of Gay agent said this to me the other day. It's like, it's all a mind game. If you're sitting with extra leg room in economy plus on American, the difference between that and first is negligible, but in your mind, it's not. It's a lot, you know, it's a couple more inches, it's this, it's that. But you know what? It's better than a drug habit. And so, playing the points game has kept me I don't, haven't gone the private jet route. So I'm gonna stay with the points for now.
there we go. That's gonna be our quote from this. Seth Price. Traveling is better than a drug habit.
I mean, look,
Um,
it really is. You got to, it's sort of, it's a intellectual game. It was literally like midnight Saturday night. I was like, you know what? I just thought Delta doesn't charge more than $300,000. I can literally switch my whole trip like that. And to me, we just came back from spring break in Baja Mar. It was my dad's 90th. So we did a great week with my dad, my mom, my sister, my kids and wife. And, I'm convinced half the reason he's still going at 90 is he's still practicing law. The gears are
mm,
still turning. And so whether it's chess or whether it's maximizing the value of points, it's a game. And in one, you end up in a first class seat. In the other, you get a better score on Yahoo Chess.
there we go. Well, so I'm gonna dive into that in a second. So this week's newsletter is about iterating. So in essence, the concept of like what got you here won't get you there, and you gotta like focus on the real problem, solve that, find the next real problem, and then ultimately like the first problem comes back around. I'm curious from what you're talking about though here, like from an iteration standpoint of this whole process, like that first trip to the Field of Dreams place versus swapping stuff around changes. So like to anybody listening who it's they want to start with the better travel, more fun travel, having a life while they go to these conferences. What's like the first thing for them to start with?
I think that figuring out what you like to do, you know what I mean? Like, there are a lot of ways to make a buck in life. And my law partner's brother, his dad and brother, are both insurance people. And the brother was like, look, if you can wake up in the morning, look yourself in the mirror and say, I sell insurance, you do very well and not work very, very hard. It's their residuals. People do business with people they know, like, and trust. It's a widget. Everybody pays the same amount. So first, figuring out that you're doing something you like. When I was an associate, I was terrible. I didn't like it. I wanted to be a client. I wanted to be somebody creating the stock option plan. I wanted to be, in putting a stock option plan in place. I didn't want to be the one drafting the paperwork behind it. And so I think first, making sure you like what you're doing substantively. And then secondly, and look, so I was back in those days, it doesn't really matter if you're in first class or coach or the back of the plane. If it gets yourself to cool places and you get to do cool things and, especially pre-kids, making sure that you take advantage of everything a town has to offer or really get to know a place, it's awesome. I know there's a real balance. This is something that probably is not the sexier side of this, but there's a point I remember when the kids were little where I often wouldn't go out later. And Vegas stopped being a place I would do the late night and 10 o'clock because I wanted to know when I got back to home, I wasn't a wreck and I could actually hang out and play with the kids and wake up early, give my wife a break and take them out to the park. So, to me, I think it's a balance, figuring out what drives you and then, knowing that it's the journey. I think that's what you're seeing. It's like if you know that it's a journey and that literally the happy hour you saw at Tech Show that you came to was one that started about 8 years ago. I love going for the data Tech Show. Very often, if I'm nothing else going on, I'll just leave home in the morning, take a flight, get off, take the Uber to the show. And so we just started saying, hey, meet at the bar. This is a great example. Let's say you have a small business, but many of the listeners here have a law firm, and you want to reserve a party room. That's very expensive. If we were at that convention center or that hotel and said, I want to reserve a room, it might be as much as $5,000 for 2 hours plus tip and tax. Go to the bar, you put your credit card down. I think twice in life has the number gone over 2,500 for a party that I've thrown. Most of the time, it is really hard to spend enough money just putting down a credit card and having it. In this case, I now have enough friends in the space with Chelsea Lambert and others. We had 7 people split a tab that turned out to be $850 for 70 people. You know,
Total or
it's
each?
no total.
Oh
We
my gosh.
split exactly. It's nonsense. The things you can do when you start to think about that it is so, again, this was a bunch of people splitting it, but most tech shows the bill's about $300 and there are 2 of us and we have 20 or 30 people come. So it's
Yeah.
thinking of creative ways to do things that aren't breaking the bank. I'll tell you a great story I think you appreciate. When my parents were celebrating their 25th wedding anniversary, I just graduated college, so I'm about 21 years old. And I live in New York City, and you can't just throw I wanted to be, our family does surprise parties. So you can't just throw a New York City surprise party at somebody's house. If you say to a family friend or a relative, I want it like, they say, yeah, we have 15, 20 people. But, a Manhattan apartment doesn't allow for 50, 60 people, the people of a lifetime to get together. And so I was like, what do I do? So I called around, and back in the day, when the World Trade Center was still standing, Windows on the World was the top story of the World Trade Center. And I remember they had a brunch for 1995. So I call the restaurant and I say, I'd like to make, and this today, can you do this today? I don't know. But it was 1995 for a mimosa brunch. So I'm like, I'd like to, find out, I called up and I said, who do you want to speak to? It's like you have 2 choices. There's catering and there's the restaurant. I'm like, what's the difference? Well, catering is $80 a person and the brunch in the restaurant's 1995. I'm like, okay, I'll speak to the restaurant, please. Connect me to the restaurant. What's your, do you have any rooms that you can, reserve the entire room? And they're like, yeah, we have a room for 74 people. I'm like, may I make a reservation for 74, please? So literally for $20 a head times 74, I borrowed like $1,500 from 500 from 3 relatives and was able to put on this epic, anniversary party that never could have otherwise. So I think when we're talking about this, this isn't like you got to spend the most. I think it's thinking about ways to touch people. You don't need to do a big epic dinner, but if you're the connector that brings people together, it just, it creates a great community. We had, just the table of thought leaders that we got to hang out with in Chicago the other day. That would not have happened if it was an excuse to do it. And I think looking for excuses to do things is sort of what I would say, and figuring out a way that it's about the people and not the big fancy steak dinner that might break the bank.
Well, see, and it was interesting because you started with this like
Yeah.
the concept of figure out what you enjoy doing, and I thought you were gonna go like in a hobbies because like so for me, I played disc golf in I think 38 states somewhere around there. So like when I go to this travel, I'm like, all right, is there a course somewhere? So I played at Illinois Tech when I was over there for Tech Show, or like going to find the Michelin star restaurant, grab
Or
the
the
guide
stadium,
and
so there are people who do every baseball stadium.
yeah,
Nalini wants to be in every state. There's that. Look, it is whatever brings you joy. There are some people that have to check that have one thing. I play tennis. I have not incorporated that into my road thing. I do that when I'm home. When I'm on the road, I don't pretend to do it. There are people that drag their golf
right.
clubs everywhere. Um, and so, and then I find some of that being limiting for me. It's for me, it's the cool hole in the wall restaurant, getting off the strip and taking a bunch of people to Lotus of Siam, right? It's finding those experiences and then sharing it with others. To me, that's been a real joy.
Yeah. Well, but that's the answer, right? Is everybody figuring out what their thing is? If you're looking for something to attach to the travel, like find
Correct.
that hobby.
And look, if you're an introvert, this will work less well. You're gonna have to find something different than that because this works within, and don't think just because it works for one person, it's gonna work for you. Um, you know, they're friends that are huge theater buffs, and they make sure that in every market they're in, they get to a show. One of my favorite stories along those lines, a friend of mine from college, her brother was a huge opera aficionado. He was able to, within the company he was in, become like a mini celebrity. People wanted to go with him to the opera because it was a much different experience. You'd explain everything that was going on. It was like having your,
Gotcha.
and so I think, going deep on anything is great. And knowing that, it may not be that Frisbee golf integrates with everything, but if that's really what you want to do, you'll find a way for it to happen. I mean, I've never actually played Frisbee golf. It would be like one of those things that, like, imagine you get at one of the events, one of the opportunity to take novices and show them the whole world they've never been part of.
I don't know that I'd start with like 35-degree weather and 30-mile-an-hour winds in Chicago as your first round, but you
Exactly.
know, maybe in Vegas. I'm sure there's an open course in the desert somewhere.
Absolutely.
Um, so, we talked about like the hobbies, enjoying stuff. Is there is there a mental block to this? Like, did you have to sort of say like, "Hey, I can go to the Field of Dreams place"? Do you find business
I mean,
owners being
again,
like,
maybe I'm different. I didn't see a mental block. I'm the one who asked this young
"Yeah,
woman to come with me. To me, I'm like, I think a generation ago, kids came to these conferences. AAJ had a whole junior setup. A lot of it seems to have gone by the wayside, especially with the proliferation of conferences. And I've just said, look, if I get traveling with my kids, I love it. My son still talks about going to Austin as a 8-year-old and having a drink at Austin, Shirley Temple at Austin City Limits. Listening to pop stars play. I mean, their experiences in parts. There are parts where it makes sense. I'm pretty protective of school. Like, I don't like, probably to a fault. I think that I've not pulled my kids out as much as I probably should have. I've taken the school is sacred approach for the most part, and maybe with my third having a little bit more leeway. So I would say being advice I did not take that I wish I had done, which is being willing to stretch a little bit. I think that post COVID with Zoom and homeschooling proliferation, that people are more willing to say, what's one day in a classroom if you could get my daughter, for example, skipped a day and came to Miami for AAJ. And just the process of meeting people at the pool, coming to dinners, having to be able to carry yourself, talking to adults, to me, that piece is pretty valuable. The pivot piece that I think that I'm most scared about is that the sheltered world that our kids live in being taken everywhere by minivan or even going to these luxury places, that I am concerned of the development of grit, if that's a thing you develop, that I grew up in pre-Giuliani New York, where you were literally left to the house with mugging money. So if you were mugged, you would give them the $10 or $20 bill and move on with your day rather than have to, deal with something worse. So I am concerned to a certain extent that the kids have not had to deal with adversity the way that we've, you know, used, people talk about the participation trophies, that we don't have as much of a nomenclature or a distinction of winning versus not. And not that I want these kids to be cutthroat, but I think that that's something that I'm concerned with with my kids, that I want them to have that drive, even though they've had privilege and they've been able to do cool stuff. And that's probably one of the scariest things, that you're just hoping that they don't fall back on that. I saw a generation before, one family member who was an early doctor pre-insurance, whole family pitched in to send one of my grandfather's generation to med school. And his kids have been a disaster, neither motivated, neither, they just spent the trust fund, not massive trust fund, but enough that they did. And that's what scares me.
So, first, I want to thank you for the school thing because I'm pulling my kid out to go to Magic Kingdom on Wednesday. So I'm glad that it was not a hero horror stories of taking your kids out of school from that standpoint. I want to dive into that, like changing it for kids, but I have to share this story with you. So my kids' school hosts a Orlando Magic game night, right? Like go to the game, and I
Yeah.
think like the chorus got to perform before the game or at halftime or something like that. And we're like in the middle of the third quarter, and my son like looks around. He was 6 at the time, and he goes, "Where's our suite?" And had to think about it, and I was like, "Oh yeah, you've never been to a game in a regular seat before." And like, look, mind you, for the Magic, like it's a cheaper ticket. You get 24 of them in a suite. It's cheaper per ticket. And then we'd go and we'd bring all of our referral sources and other lawyers and
I got you,
doctors
but
and
it's
all
their
this.
normal.
And yeah, but it didn't occur to me that that was his, like, here he is at 6 being like, well, Dad, where's our suite? And then admitted to
And
me,
why isn't it catered?
yeah, right. Well, so it was just that was my
No,
moment
no, no.
of,
It's
oh
it's
my
it, it
God.
is it's a thing. My oldest is a mega sports fan, and look, part of it was I had the means, and I liked it. We've had good seats, but at over time, I've mixed it in. We sit in the upper bowl for Caps games, and I just want to make sure that it's about going. It's great when you have nice seats. There's nothing wrong with that, but it shouldn't be like, it's just like, if you can get yourself to London for the weekend, sit in the back of the plane, do whatever it takes. Don't let the fact that it's not like an upgraded seat stop you. And I feel like I want to make sure that I don't know, this is a very affected conversation, but I don't, with status and means, I want to be, I love being comfortable in a first class seat. I really don't want my kids flying first class. There are people who the whole family flies that way. I try to segment it. I don't know whether it's the right answer, but when they can pay for it, they should have it. But they shouldn't. That should be something you push for, not that you're anointed with, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, I mean that's my favorite retirement advice, right? Is like once you get over that hump, it's either you fly first class or your children fly first class after you're dead. And like I just that concept has been so ingrained in me. But but to go deeper on that though, like how are you traveling differently when it's with the kids? Are you incorporating more family friendly events when the kids are coming with you to conferences? Like how does that part change it?
When it happens, I don't want to say I don't give a lot of thought to it. I bring them along, and uh, you know, I've had some great experiences at AAJ where members of Leaders Forum. And so when my son was younger, he could sit there and the iPad could entertain if I was speaking somewhere, and was able to there are other kids at these events. One of the things I'll throw out there, which is sort of along those lines, which I think what makes successful kid travel is when there's somebody else their age. And when they meet one friend, they're happy. I know growing up when you went somewhere to away for a vacation or something, it was all about making a friend for the week. You spent the whole week with those newfound friends, and it wasn't like the days of social media where you stayed in touch with them, but they were your. And if you went back to the same place, you might see them in Florida, the retirement villages where my grandmothers lived. I had friends that I would see every Christmas when I would go down there. And I think some of that has gone away. We literally just talked about this the other night. Much of the reason it's gone away is that all the kids have cell phones now. So they
Right.
they aren't forced to find somebody to entertain them. They literally sit around on their phones and stare at them. Not that we don't. And and so what I've loved about the conferences is that there are things that are not phone centric, where whether it's entertainment, the pool at an event, the cabanas. I mean, again, we're ridiculously blessed. They're like 5 cabanas sponsored by people providing free food and drink that want you to be there.
Right.
Um, and that it creates that environment. So for me, I've like the number one thing that I know that they will, as much as they like spending time with me, they really will have a great time if if they meet a friend and they hang out with them. But that said, I try to do the opposite, which is bring them along. So whether it's a dinner in South Beach at this amazing Italian restaurant owned by an Israeli that's like a party night every night, or whether it's going to Hakkasan at the Fountain Blue, it's having those experiences, getting dressed up, having to speak to. We happen to have a bunch of Price Benowitz litigators down at A&J. Having them spend time, answer questions. They get when they get overload, they'll go back to their screen for a little bit. But the idea that they're part of a conversation, because those are the life skills. It may not be grit, but they're going to know how to converse with people in a business setting. And to me, that's one of those things that we both see when you interview people for first jobs. There's great distinction between people that can have that conversation who are still stuck in, I can relate to kids, but not adults.
Oh, totally. Well, I just finished Source Code, Bill Gates's memoir of his like younger years, and he talks about that. He's like, I was such an awkward kid, but we would have these like, 10 families get together on a lake in Washington, and we'd like rotate, you'd go to a different family,
Housing,
the
yeah.
parents, yeah, like just wild to see. And he's like, I remember negotiating Microsoft contracts and being like, oh, I can talk to adults easier than, other 18-year-old kids from these
Right, because
moments.
you had that experience. His dad was a big deal lawyer. Have you ever heard? Great, we're digressing, but I love the story about how Gates's dad is responsible for what happened, the building of Starbucks. I don't know if you listen to the podcast by the founder of Starbucks. There are a couple of them out there where he talks about it, where he needed money and somebody tried to pull the deal out from under him, and Bill Gates Sr. is the reason that he ended up being able to acquire Starbucks.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
that part's not in the book. I will check that out.
No, no, because it was that was not his story. I missed it. He,
Right.
he was doing what funny, like he came to DC and it was like I didn't it was like cheap. It was like $50 for him to be interviewed by Savannah Guthrie, and I didn't pull the trigger on it. And yet I looked in Seattle, the same event was like $1,500, like to for the book tour for Source Code.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing to me the things that have value or the demand from somewhere else. Like my wife was looking at flying to like Barcelona to go to Taylor Swift. It was cheaper for the flight
Correct.
and the
Yes.
tickets
Yeah.
than it was to get
And
the a Tampa show.
don't, it's one of the few things I did not thread the needle on to make happen. I think, but the daughter's at camp, so that did a bunch of the dates, but it was, I thought that was brilliant for the people that did it because they got the trip. They did the whole thing for less than stupid tickets down the street from them.
Yeah, completely. All right, so we'll get towards a little bit of our wrap up. I want to talk about so this month, when y'all are watching this, it's the end of May. So earlier this month, we launched the Luau, our online community, trying to get more business owners together to talk about life. Put life forward. We talk about work-life balance, but we spend all the money in our business, but we only calendar things for our business. So really this as the life and work-life balance. So check that out. We got a good group of at the time I'm recording this, will be about 20 something. Hopefully by the end of the month we'll be closer to 30 or 40.
What's the format like? What are you doing?
So it's a Facebook group at its core, but then we're getting together on, Google Meet and Zoom to do like walking meetings together, do a book club, and really just sharing the life aspect of it, right? Like it took me so many mistakes to realize I was building a business for the purpose of being able to see my kid and see my family and show up well. And so really trying to
Well,
get people together.
sounds like you've done a pretty darn good job. I got to visit you on your year-long road trip as you came through DC. Got to see it in person. But
Oh yeah, but that was me not prioritizing that stuff and realizing like it honestly, Seth, I was like if I'm gonna go to business, I'm at least gonna go to business being a good father. But then found out that like by making those prioritizations, it forced me to put systems in place. It forced me to
right.
prioritize what I needed to do. And so the business did better because I wasn't just always ready to do more.
Interesting. Along those lines, what I was to say is I think it's brilliant. There's a group called Tiger 21, which is for people that have, exited a business and trying to figure they're now set financially for life. It's half where should you invest your money and how do you invest your money, and half pretty much interpersonal for people because people in those positions are now have to figure out how do you make sure your kids are not complete screw ups? How do you,
Sure.
and look, they may have already screwed them up in that process, but it's there. So the idea that you're not waiting till you've, checked the box to have those conversations, I think is really cool. And it go hopefully it allows you to give that reflection. Nothing I haven't struggled with, X number of nights away. To me, it's not it's the question of what are you like when you're there? Are you present? Because I remember growing up, there were people that had places in like Scarsdale that, they would leave their house before the kids woke up and came
Zoom's
back after they were.
wait, hold on. Zoom's telling me
Yeah,
you that your internet was red.
yeah, so we should we just I'll you'll have to make a cut because I must
Yeah,
have
yeah.
frozen.
No problem.
Okay. I'm not see that red again. I'll try to land the plane. One of the things I found interesting by juxtaposition, while I'm away many nights a year, growing up, there were people that were living in Scarsdale, and the parents would get up before the kids woke up, go to work, and come home after they went to sleep. And to me, that's why the travel doesn't seem like such a big deal. If I miss 3 dinners,
Mm.
in the course of a month, it's not great, but compared to people that have done other things, and if I come back jazzed and energized, you know, if somebody is playing hockey at night or they're playing golf all weekend without their kids, what is it? So I think that it is a balance and we got to be aware of it. I know the kids pick up on things that we may or may not realize they're picking up. And I think that's
Totally.
why the group you're creating is brilliant.
Well, thanks, man. So we've got about, 5 minutes or so left. Anything that we're missing from this concept of like having a life while traveling, while doing the conference circuit, while growing a business from the road? Like, what else do we want to make
You
sure
know,
we tell
you know,
people?
I think it's not, you're looking at one guy doing it one way. It's not like, I think, look, take yourself, which I think is more replicable, which is you have a business, you put SOPs in practice so that you weren't tethered to an office. I mean, to me, that's a more scalable or replicable concept because there are a lot more things you can do. We have this little world of the intersection for me of referrals to a law firm and clients for BluShark and just, you know, innovative business ideas that you get with travel. But when you are, for many people that have a business, it may not be as monetizable with travel, but if you're able to remove the necessity of presence. And one of the things I've seen for both organizations as they've developed, forget about travel for work, right? That's why I get on the plane. I can justify it and check a box. But what you did with your year is you basically said, I can put enough stuff in place that I can work from anywhere. And let me ask, I want to turn the tables on you for a second. When
Sure.
you traveled, how many hours a day, if you were in, a campsite outside the Grand Canyon, were you working versus just, having time with the kids? How much were you focused work and how much were you on your phone, even if you weren't sitting focused full time?
So I would work Mondays and Thursdays. Heather would work Tuesdays and Fridays. We drive Wednesdays and Saturdays for the most part. She was a lot more on the phone because she had, the PI cases. For me, I was doing basically the marketing stuff. So it wasn't at, so I would basically do all the driving and then she would knock out whatever phone calls while that was going on. And so we had it pretty structured so that I was able to actually do things, 5 days a week and really just work too.
And part of it is, this is a whole nother chapter maybe is what does your spouse want? Because my wife doesn't love she likes to travel she's going to Australia, she likes that, but the idea of going to Vegas for a conference is not her idea of fun. The networking parties, she would put the ball in her head. She has core friends, she plays her mahjong, she has three different sets of girls nights that she does in rotation, but it's not going out and meeting new and different people for the most part. It's that. And so I think that you have a spouse that you figured it out with, and I think that's an important thing that takes some more unpacking, which is my wife, to her, being at home and having dinner at home with the kids is not a penalty. That's her comfort zone versus somebody who feels like they're missing out, or having a world where you do it together. I think that's an interesting balance that's probably not talked about a heck of a lot.
That's a really good point. Cool. All right, so let me talk about next week's episode. We'll come back for wrap up. So really interesting that was where you ended this, because next week I'm talking with Billy Tarasio. I know we all know Billy, modern law in Arizona, and just such a cool person with a really great story. What we're talking about next week is how to meet your people. And so, like, Billy's talking about creating this community in Arizona, talking about some of the crazy cases that have come up, talking from a divorce attorney standpoint, like really finding the people as a component of living a great life. And so interesting you talk about the spouse, because obviously, I mean, I think that's your most important person in terms of having a great life is the spouse and the kids, or the significant other and the kids, and then you build out a community from there.
No, it's so true, and I think that it's that balance, and you can see from afar people who started out, and that reason for divorce is many, but I think some of it has to come to, like, what do you want, and if it is too far apart, that's a whole nother issue, which sort of goes to finding that happy medium, what makes sense, what's compromise, and where can what's yin yang, and what's oil and vinegar.
Well, the thing that I listen, there are plenty of lawyers who get in trouble because they are just selfish jerks, like who have the God complex. But then, like, from my standpoint, so many of my clients end up being so selfless that they let themselves get ground down. And so, sort of finding that, like, Aristotle golden mean of putting yourself first, whether that's taking, unicorn space from fair play, whether that's having, two or three conferences a year and, getting away from everybody in a constructive way to show up refreshed with everybody. Like, it's really interesting to see those dynamics when, most lawyers get a bad rap for being arrogant, pain in the butts.
Awesome.
All right. So for anybody who's been listening to this for the last, 50 or so minutes, who's smart enough to want to hear more of your wisdom, I know you have been on fire on LinkedIn. So, but I don't know
We
if
got we
they,
got LinkedIn. We got Law Firm Blueprint. You've been on there with Jay Ruane. I have my own little geeky podcast, the SEO Insider, that we just talk about. It hasn't dropped yet, but Neil Patel, getting to hear some of his thoughts and insights. Where basically, if I call somebody up and say, "Hey, you want to chit chat for 30 minutes?" They hang up on me, and if I say, "You want to be on my podcast?" Like, sure. So I look forward to that. And again, I enjoy doing it. It's like, why are you doing this podcast? You enjoy it. It pushes you, and hopefully you get to share some of your wisdom and things that you're learning with others.
awesome, man. Did you want to do the John Morgan story at
Oh
the
no, it
end,
wasn't
or?
that. It wasn't. It was he just I mentioned offline that when I was in Maui for the John Fisher Mastermind, I friends with Morgan, and I just was messengering with him and said, "Come up to my house." And my wife and I came up there for an evening. It was right before he decided to double down on Biden in South Carolina first go around, and we had this magical night for me because he and Jody's like, "Why is he bragging?" I'm like, "These are the most amazing war stories ever." ever of the things that he's accomplished and done. But I invited him the next day to come down, and he met with the Fisher Mastermind group. And he started off by saying, I see Seth at these conferences, and I thought he must have this awful wife because he'd be like, why, and it's like, because he's at these things. I met Jody; she's lovely. So now, anyway, it was a very funny juxtaposition that he sort of, when John Morgan notices you're at a bunch of conferences, you're traveling a fair bit.
Well, and I guess from his standpoint, thinking you were trying to get away from the family, but realizing
Exactly.
that wasn't the case. That's too funny.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Seth, thank you for being with us. Thank you, everybody who watched and listened. We'll see you back here next week for Billy Tarasio's episode. In the meantime, have a wonderful week and start working on living that laid back life.